They say that good fences make good neighbors, but I have learned that fences are nothing but wood and wire. It is respect that forms the true boundary between peace and war, and my neighbor had neither. I stood in the center of my garden, the morning mist clinging to the petals of the Rosa Gallica bushes my wife, Martha, had planted 40 years ago. They were deep crimson, smelling of old perfume and memory. This garden was not just a plot of dirt. It was a cemetery of moments. The hydrangeas where we hid Easter eggs for our son Michael. The old oak tree where he learned to climb. The stone bench where Martha told me she was sick. Every inch of this quarter acre was consecrated ground. But for the last 6 months, my sanctuary had been under siege. I looked up, shielding my eyes against the sun, or what was left of it. Looming over my weathered cottage was a monstrosity of glass, steel, and black concrete. It was a modern mansion, a jagged scar on the landscape of our quiet, historic neighborhood. It belonged to Gavin. Gavin was 35, drove a truck that cost more than my entire pension, and believed that the world existed solely to be paved over. He didn't walk, he stomped. He didn't speak, he shouted into a Bluetooth headset. And he didn't ask, he took. I bent down to deadhead a fading rose, my knees popping with the dry sound of old twigs snapping. At 78, my body was a map of old injuries and gravity's persistence. I moved slowly. I spoke softly. To a man like Gavin, these were not signs of age. They were signs of weakness. They were an invitation. A loud clang shattered the morning silence. I flinched, my hand slipping and a thorn biting into my thumb. I looked toward the fence line. A construction worker, high up on the scaffolding of Gavin's third-story balcony, had dropped a metal clamp. It landed in my bird bath, cracking the stone bowl right down the middle. "Arthur!" I shouted, my voice thin in the morning air. The worker didn't even look down, but Gavin did. He walked out of his back door, a massive sliding glass panel that cost more than my car. He was wearing white linen pants and a tight t-shirt, holding a protein shake. He looked at the broken bird bath, then at me. He didn't apologize. He smirked. "It's just a bird bath, Arthur," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Buy a new one. Send me the bill. Actually, don't." He laughed, a sharp, barking sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "It's not about the money, Gavin," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about respect. Your crew is careless. Last week it was the hydrangeas, today the bird bath." "Your property is an eyesore," Gavin shot back, his smile vanishing. "Look at it. It's a shack. It drags down my property value just by existing. I offered to buy you out, old man. You should have taken the check." "I am not selling," I said, turning my back on him. "That can be arranged," he muttered. I pretended not to hear him. I went back to my roses, my hands trembling slightly. I told myself it was just noise. I told myself that men like Gavin were temporary, storms that blew through and eventually ran out of rain. I was the mountain. I would endure. But I was wrong. The storm wasn't passing. It was intensifying. The next morning, I didn't wake up to the sun. I woke up to a scream. It wasn't a human scream. It was the mechanical, tearing shriek of a two-stroke engine running at full throttle. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked at the clock, 6:15 a.m. The sound was close, terrifyingly close. I threw off the quilt and grabbed my cane. I didn't bother with a robe. I shuffled through the kitchen, unlocked the back door, and stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled of gasoline and fresh sap. My eyes adjusted to the light, and what I saw stopped my breath in my throat. Gavin was there. He wasn't on his side of the property line.
He was standing 5 feet inside my yard, his boots crushing the bed of lilies I had planted last spring. He was holding a massive orange chainsaw, and he was cutting into the oak tree. I screamed. The sound tore from my throat, raw and desperate. "Stop!" That tree wasn't just wood. It was the anchor of the backyard. It held the tire swing I had hung for Michael before he deployed in '98. The tire was still there, swayed by the wind, a ghost of the boy who never came home from the desert. The tree provided the dappled shade that kept Martha's roses from burning in the July heat. Gavin didn't stop. The saw roared, biting deeper into the ancient bark. Sawdust sprayed into the air like blood. I ran. I moved faster than I had in 10 years, fueled by a surge of adrenaline that masked the pain in my hips. I reached him and grabbed his shoulder, yelled over the roar of the engine. Gavin spun around. He was sweating, his face flushed with exertion and a manic sort of glee. He killed the engine. The silence that rushed back into the yard was deafening. "Get your hands off me, you dusty old relic," he spat. I was shaken, my cane raised like a weapon I didn't know how to use. "This is my land." "It's blocking my view," Gavin said, wiping sawdust from his forehead. "It casts a shadow on my infinity pool after 2 p.m. "I don't care about your pool. This tree is 100 years old." "Your son is dead, Arthur," Gavin said. He said it casually, as if commenting on the weather. "And your wife is dead, and soon you'll be dead, and this tree will just be firewoofed. I'm doing you a favor." The cruelty of it took my breath away. It was so naked, so unnecessary. "Get off my property," I whispered. I stepped forward, trying to put my body between him and the trunk. Gavin rolled his eyes. "Huh." He shoved me. It wasn't a playful push. It was a hard, violent shove to the chest. I stumbled back. My heel caught on a tree root. I went down hard. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My cane clattered away into the grass. I landed on my hip, a bolt of white-hot pain shooting up my spine. I lay there in the dirt, staring up at the sky, gasping for air. Gavin towered over me. He looked huge from down here, a giant made of ego and cruelty. He restarted the chainsaw. Vroom! He revved it, swinging the blade dangerously close to my legs. "Look at you," he sneered, shouting over the noise. "You're pathetic, rolling around in the dirt. No wonder your wife died. She probably gave up just to get away from you. No wonder your son didn't come back." I tasted blood. I had bitten my tongue when I fell. Gavin yelled, laughing as he turned back to the tree. "Everything you touch rots. Why don't you just die and let me bulldoze this shack?" The saw bit into the wood again. I lay there, helpless, watching the chips fly. I watched the branch holding the tire swing shudder and fall. It hit the ground with a heavy, final thud. I lay there in the dirt, tasting blood and ash, listening to the chainsaw rip through the memory of my son. He called me cursed. He thought I was just a helpless old man waiting to die, a piece of debris to be cleared away for his view. He saw the cane and the gray hair. He didn't know that before I retired, I was the chief surveyor for the entire county. He didn't know that I had mapped every inch of this city when his father was still in diapers. If you've ever been pushed too far by a bully who thinks money is power, and you want to see exactly how the weak strike back, hit subscribe. You need to see what I found in the county archives, because I was about to teach Gavin a lesson about lines he couldn't cross. I didn't fight back physically. I knew my limitations. If I tried to tackle him, I would end up in the hospital, and he would win. He would claim self-defense. He would claim I was senile and attacked him. I waited until he was done. He cut the main limbs. He destroyed the canopy. He left the logs scattered across my lawn, a chaotic mess of destruction, and walked back to his property line without a backward glance. "Log off," he yelled over his shoulder. I lay there for another 5 minutes, just breathing. I let the pain in my hips sharpen my mind. I let the humiliation crystallize into something cold and hard. I rolled onto my knees. I crawled to my cane. I pulled myself up, using the scarred trunk of the oak tree for support. I brushed the dirt off my pajamas. I touched the bark of the tree, sticky with sap. It felt like a wound. "I'm sorry, Michael," I whispered to the empty air. I turned and walked back into my house. I didn't look at Gavin's mansion. I didn't look at the ruin of my garden. I went inside and locked the door. I showered, washing the dirt and blood from my skin. The hot water stung, but it woke me up. I dressed in my work clothes, a flannel shirt and sturdy trousers. I brewed a pot of coffee, black and strong. Then I went to my study. Most people today live on the internet.
They believe that if it isn't on Google Maps, it doesn't exist. They trust the digital lines drawn by satellites and algorithms. Gavin was one of those people. He trusted the digital survey his overpaid, rushed contractors had filed. But I come from an older world, a world of ink and vellum and brass theodolites, a world where you walked the land, felt the rise and fall of the earth, and understood the secrets buried beneath the soil. My study was a time capsule. Rolled-up maps were stacked in cubbyholes like honeycomb. Flat file cabinets held blueprints dating back to 1960. The air smelled of ozone and aging paper. I sat at my drafting table. I didn't look at the recent files. I bypassed the digital records entirely. I knew they could be altered, updated, or corrected by a developer with deep pockets and a friend in the permit office. I went to the bottom drawer of the steel cabinet in the corner. It was locked. I took the key from the hollowed-out book on the shelf, The History of Roman Aqueducts. I unlocked the drawer. Inside were the orphan surveys, the original hand-drawn field notes from the Great Floodplain Assessment of 1982. I had drawn them myself. I remembered that summer. It was hot. The mosquitoes were vicious. But we had found something critical about the water table in this valley. I pulled out the tube labeled Sector 7G. I unrolled the map on the table, weighing down the corners with brass compasses. The paper was yellowed, brittle at the edges, but the ink was black and permanent. I adjusted my spectacles and leaned in, running my finger along the contour lines. There was my lot, Lot 409. And there was Gavin's lot, Lot 410. I traced the property line. My finger stopped. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who has just found the blood trail. According to the digital maps Gavin likely used, his property line ran straight back from the road. But according to the 1982 federal survey, the one that superseded all local zoning because it involved water management, there was an anomaly, a drainage easement. Not just a small utility strip, a Class 1 federal drainage easement. It ran diagonally across Lot 410, cutting a wide swath through the western side of the property. It was unstable ground, sitting atop a subterranean aquifer that fed the city's emergency reservoir. Building on it wasn't just a code violation, it was a felony. It compromised the city's water safety. I grabbed my magnifying glass. I looked at the overlay of where Gavin's house stood. His 3-car garage, built on the easement. His west wing, housing his home theater and gym, built on the easement. And the crowning glory, the new infinity pool that required him to cut down my tree? Gavin hadn't just encroached on my land, he had built a multi-million-dollar structure on top of a federal no-go zone.
And he had done it by either ignoring the survey or bribing someone to look the other way. But he couldn't bribe me. And he couldn't bribe the map. I sat back in my chair. The rage that had been shaking my hands all morning settled into a cold, geometric precision. He wanted to talk about property values. He wanted to talk about rules. I checked the clock. It was 11 a.m. I didn't call the police. The police would just file a report about a property dispute. They would tell me it was a civil matter. I aimed higher. I picked up my rotary phone. I dialed a number I knew by heart, even though I hadn't called it in 5 years. It rang 4 times. City Planning and Zoning, Director's Office. A gruff voice answered. Miller, I said. There was a pause on the line. Then the tone changed completely. The voice asked, Arthur? Miller, my old apprentice. I had trained him when he was a 22-year-old kid who didn't know a plumb line from a fishing line. I had taught him everything he knew about the land. Now he was the director of zoning enforcement for the entire city. It's me, son, I said. Arthur, my God, it's been too long. How are you? The roses are in danger, Miller, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. And I need a favor. Anything, Chief. I need you to pull the file on 410 Oakwood Drive. I heard the tapping of a keyboard. Okay, looking at it now. Permit looks... Wait, this was expedited. Self-certified inspector. Miller, I said, look at the 1982 overlay. Silence. Long, heavy silence. Then a low whistle. Jesus Christ, Miller breathed. He built right over the aquifer access. He has money, I said, and he thinks rules don't apply to him. He just cut down my oak tree, Miller. He assaulted me on my own land. I heard the sound of a chair scraping back. I heard the rustle of a jacket being grabbed. Arthur, Miller said, his voice hard as granite. I'm looking at the satellite imaging. He's also over the setback line. I know, I said. I'm going to do what you taught me to do, Miller said. Miller, I whispered, bring the red tags. I'm bringing the whole department, Miller replied. And Arthur, don't go outside. Just make some coffee. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, surrounded by the smell of old paper and justice. I looked at the framed photo of Martha on my desk. She was smiling, holding a bouquet of the roses she loved so much. He shouldn't have touched the tree, Martha, I said to the empty room. I stood up. My hips still ached, but I felt taller than I had in years. I walked to the kitchen and started the coffee maker. Tomorrow was Saturday. Gavin was hosting a massive housewarming party. I had seen the catering trucks arriving earlier in the week. He was going to show off his stolen kingdom to the world. I smiled. It was going to be a party to remember. Saturday morning arrived with a deceptive kind of beauty. The sky was a piercing, innocent blue, completely indifferent to the catastrophe I knew was coming. I woke up at 5 a.m., hours before the invasion next door would begin. I took my time. I showered, shaving my face carefully, nicking my chin once but dabbing it clean. I opened the closet and bypassed my usual flannel shirts. Today wasn't a day for work clothes. Today was a day for ceremony. I pulled out my Sunday suit. It was tweed, heavy and scratchy, smelling faintly of mothballs and the cedar chest where I kept it. It was the suit I wore to church, to funerals, and to the retirement party where the city had given me a gold watch and a plaque for 40 years of service. It was armor made of wool. I put it on. I tied my tie with a Windsor knot, my fingers remembering the movements even if my joints protested.
I polished my shoes until I could see the reflection of a man who wasn't broken, wasn't cursed, and certainly wasn't finished. By 9 a.m., the noise began. It started with the trucks. Not construction trucks this time, but sleek, black catering vans and florists. They swarmed Gavin's driveway, unloading trays of food, mountains of ice, and arrangements of white lilies that looked like they belonged at a state funeral. By 10 a.m., the guests arrived. I sat on my front porch in my rocking chair, a fresh pot of coffee on the small table beside me. The deed to my property and the 1982 Federal Survey map rested on my lap, weighted down by my cane. I watched them. They parked their Porsches and Teslas on the street, blocking my mailbox, their tires crushing the edge of my lawn. They were young, beautiful, and loud. They wore sunglasses that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They laughed as they walked up Gavin's driveway, marveling at the monstrosity of glass and steel he had erected. I heard a woman shout over the thumping bass of the house music that had started to shake my windows. So modern! Gavin was in his element. He stood on his front steps, holding a glass of champagne, wearing a linen suit that was a shade too bright. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. He saw me sitting on my porch. He raised his glass in a mocking toast, a smirk playing on his lips. "Enjoy the view, old man," his expression said. "This is the future." I didn't react. I just took a sip of my coffee. It was black, bitter, and hot. It tasted like patience. I checked my watch. 10:58 a.m. 2 minutes, I whispered to the empty porch. At exactly 11 a.m., the music from next door was drowned out by a different kind of rumble. It was a deep, guttural roar that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. The guests turned, confused, looking toward the street. The parade began. It wasn't a parade of celebration. It was a convoy of reckoning. First came the white city trucks, 4 of them. They bore the seal of the Department of Planning and Zoning on their doors. They moved with authority, blocking the street, boxing in the luxury cars. Behind them came 2 police cruisers, their lights flashing silently in the bright morning sun. And bringing up the rear, moving slowly on a flatbed trailer like a prehistoric beast, was a heavy-duty excavator. Its yellow paint was scarred, its bucket massive and rusted. It looked like it could eat a house. The music next door stopped abruptly. The laughter died. The clinking of glasses ceased. Gavin's guests stood frozen in the driveway, staring at the armada that had just laid siege to their party. The door of the lead truck opened. Miller stepped out. He looked different than he had on the phone. He was wearing his official high-visibility vest over a crisp white shirt. He wore a hard hat. He held a clipboard that looked less like office supplies and more like a weapon of war. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Gavin's house. He signaled to his team. 6 inspectors poured out of the trucks, carrying tape measures, laser levels, and thick rolls of red tape. The police officers stepped out of their cruisers, adjusting their belts, their faces impassive. They marched up the driveway. I watched from my porch, rocking slowly. Forward, back, forward, back. Gavin stormed out of his front door. His face was a mask of confusion and outrage. He spilled champagne on his expensive shoes as he ran toward Miller. He screamed, his voice cracking, "Who are you? I'm hosting a private event." Miller didn't flinch. He didn't slow down. He stopped 3 feet from Gavin, invading his personal space with the confidence of a man who knows the law is on his side. "Miller?" asked. His voice was calm, professional, and loud enough to carry to the back of the silent crowd. "Yes, I'm Gavin Reynolds, and I know the mayor." Miller ignored the threat. He looked down at the ground beneath Gavin's feet. "This isn't your property, sir," Miller said. Gavin laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "I bought this lot. I built this house." "Incorrect," Miller said. He held up the clipboard. Miller turned and pointed directly at me.
Every head in the driveway turned. Gavin turned. He looked at me, sitting on my porch in my tweed suit, sipping my coffee. His eyes went wide. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a linen suit. "You have built an unpermitted structure on a Class 1 federal drainage easement," Miller continued, his voice relentless. "You have also built 10 feet over the property line onto Mr. Vance's land." Gavin yelled, waving his arms. "I had surveys done." "You paid the wrong ones," Miller said simply. "Or you paid them to look the other way." Miller signaled to his team. 2 inspectors moved past Gavin, heading straight for the massive glass wall of his living room. They didn't ask permission. They walked right through the crowd of stunned guests. One of them pulled a large, bright red sticker from his bag. It was the size of a placemat. He peeled the backing off. Slap! He stuck it directly onto the center of the glass. "Unsafe structure. Mandatory demolition order. Immediate effect." Gavin stared at the red tag.
It was a scarlet letter. It was a death sentence for his investment, he shrieked. "It's an illegal obstruction of a waterway," Miller corrected him, "and is structurally unsound because you built it on soft soil without the required pilings. It's coming down, mister." The guests were backing away. They were whispering. Some were already heading for their cars, eager to distance themselves from the disaster unfolding in front of them. The neighbors, the ones Gavin had snubbed and annoyed for months, were coming out onto their porches, watching with undisguised glee. Gavin looked around wildly. He looked at the police. He looked at the excavator being unloaded from the trailer. Then he looked at me. Our eyes locked across the expanse of the ruined lawn. I saw the realization hit him. The cursed old man wasn't helpless. The relic wasn't irrelevant. I was the one holding the map. I stopped rocking. I set my coffee cup down on the railing. I stood up, leaning on my cane. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him with the steady, unimpressed gaze of a man who has seen mountains moved and rivers redirected. I slowly lifted my coffee cup in a silent toast. "To boundaries," I thought. "You have 24 hours to vacate the structure before the city condemns it and seizes the assets to pay for the demolition," Miller announced. He turned a page on his clipboard. "Additionally," Miller said, looking at Gavin with cold eyes, "Mr. Vance has filed a civil suit for the destruction of the heritage oak tree and the emotional distress caused by your harassment. The lien is already on your remaining assets. You can't sell, you can't refinance." Gavin crumbled. It was a physical collapse. His shoulders slumped, his knees bent. The arrogance that held him up like a cheap scaffold simply gave way. He ran to the fence line. He scrambled over the low wall he had built, tearing his pants, ignoring the mud. He ran toward my porch. "Gavin!" he screamed. He stopped at the bottom of my steps, panting, sweating, his eyes wide with panic. "Please," he begged, reaching out a hand. "Tell them it's a mistake. We're neighbors. We can work this out. I'll pay you. I'll give you $1 million right now." I looked down at him. $1 million. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It could pay for a nursing home. It could pay for travel. But I looked at the stump of the oak tree in the yard. I looked at the cracked bird bath. I looked at the shadow his house cast over my roses. "I don't want your money, Gavin," I said. My voice was steady, cutting through the murmurs of his horrified guests. "I don't want your check." Gavin stared at me, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "What do you want? Name it." I pointed at the sun, which was just starting to dip behind the roof of his illegal mansion. "I want my sunlight back," I said. Gavin stared at me, uncomprehending. He didn't understand. He thought everything could be bought. He didn't understand that some things, like dignity, like memory, like light, were not for sale. Miller barked. Two policemen stepped forward. They took Gavin by the arms. "Gavin!" shouted, thrashing. "Not anymore," the officer said. "You're trespassing on Mr. Vance's property." They escorted him off my lawn. They walked him back to his own driveway, where his wife was standing by her car. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the red tag on the window. She was crying, but she wasn't looking at Gavin for comfort. She got into her convertible, started the engine, and drove away without him. The guests scattered like roaches when the kitchen light turns on. Engines revved, tires squealed. Within 10 minutes, the driveway was empty except for the city trucks and Gavin, standing alone in his ruined suit, staring at the red tag. Miller walked up to my porch. He took off his hard hat. "It's done, Chief," he said softly. "Thank you, Miller," I said. "The demolition crew starts Monday on the main structure," Miller said. "But the driveway?" He pointed to the excavator. The operator was climbing into the cab. "We can take care of that right now." I nodded. The excavator roared to life. The diesel engine chugged, a deep, rhythmic sound of power. The machine turned on its tracks. It rolled forward. The operator positioned the bucket over the concrete driveway Gavin had poured just last week. The driveway that covered the bed where Martha's prize yellow roses used to grow. Crack. The bucket came down. The concrete shattered. Dust rose into the air. I sat back in my rocking chair. I watched the machine tear up the encroachment. I watched it peel back the layers of Gavin's arrogance until only the earth remained. The curse he screamed about wasn't magic. It wasn't voodoo. It was the law. And the law, like a good foundation, holds up if you respect it. It crumbles if you try to cheat it. I reached into my shirt and pulled out the locket that hung around my neck. I opened it. Martha's face smiled back at me, frozen in black and white. "The garden will be sunny again, my love," I whispered, rubbing my thumb over her picture. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still hot. Behind me, the excavator worked, a mechanical heartbeat restoring the order of the world, one bucket of concrete at a time.